Hello everyone then, and welcome to our webinar on English as a medium of instruction. So today the session will be recorded and will be available later on our Padlet. Okay, you could see some of the lucky few who can see the chat will be able to see the link to the Padlet. Otherwise, we'll show you a QR code to join it. That is, if you want to, if you can't attend the whole session, then you'll be able to see the recorded session on that same Padlet. Well, for today, we're going to, there will be several presenters. Well, first, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Olivier Hoffman. I'm in charge of linguistic support for teachers at the University of Po. And I'll be joined by my counterparts. So maybe Albertine.
Hi everyone. I'm in charge of helping teachers and lecturers and professors at the University of Angers in converting their courses into English. Welcome everyone.
Isabelle?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm an instructional designer at the University of Le Mans and help teachers with all kinds of things, even cups of tea. And I do help them with blended learning and hybrid learning and all these newfangled things that you've heard about, I'm sure.
Amélie?
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Amélie. I also work at the University of Le Mans, and I am in charge of international projects.
Thank you. Mary?
Oh, hello. I'm Mary Page. I work at the University of Southampton, and basically I'm a teacher, and I spend a lot of time working in the EMI, EME area. And I also spend quite a lot of time working with MA and PhD students with their academic writing, briefly. Rob?
Olivier, we can hear you. Thanks.
Rob, there you go.
Yes, so yes, I'm also from the University of Southampton. Yes, my name's Rob Baird, and I did my research in East Asia looking at English medium education and how that operates there. And yes, I've worked with Mary for a long time we have a MOOC, English as a medium of instruction for academics. And we've dealt with a lot of people around the world in discussions of implementing English medium education.
Tu as la note de 17.
Merci de couper les micros.
Yes. You turn off your microphones, people who are not talking. Thank you.
Tu es deuxième sur le stage. Il fait pour la...
Monsieur Morel, Monsieur Morel, Monsieur Morel,
Monsieur Morel.
Monsieur Morel.
Premier.
Il ne nous entend pas.
Non, mais je vais le couper. Je pense que j'ai la main. Attends.
Okay.
Donc, je pourrais vous fournir une petite fiche.
Thank you for doing that.
Par contre,
Okay.
pour le classement, je vais te le donner oralement, ça.
Ok. Et est-ce que vous aurez parlé de premier nutrition?
Tu arrives, François?
Non, j'arrive pas à prendre la main sur.
Je vais essayer aussi, mais.
Attends, je l'appelle à côté.
Ouais, ok. Je pense que c'est bon là, Olivier.
I think it's okay, yeah. Okay.
Well,
I'm going to start first by I'll talk about the results that we had from the questionnaire that we sent you. That went along with the enrollment to the webinar. The results were that there were 65 people who participated, so that's quite a lot actually. You come from 7 other universities than the University of Po, Le Mans, and Angers. And as for what you're doing, so there are plenty of different jobs who answered the questionnaire. Most of them, we got instructional engineers, English teachers, specialist or content teachers, linguistic support officers, lecturers, a head of a language center, and international relations staff as well. So from many different origins. I'm not going to talk about the answers that you gave to the questions we asked, because they've been given to our presenters, so they'll give you a proper analysis, or maybe they'll answer some of your questions. Do that at the end. And just to say one small part of it that is I'd like to talk about is that less than half of you already taught in English. So I think this is quite interesting to know about that. That is, at least half of you would like to know more, probably, about how to do it, okay, and the means to do it, and if there are ways to do it. And I think that's it for me. So I'll let Rob and Mary get started. You're okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you very much indeed.
Can you see the, this is always the way people start a Teams meeting, isn't it? Can you see that?
Yes.
You can see, okay. So this is the QR code to the Padlet that you were mentioning. If anyone wants to reach for your phones and go and see that. And sorry, then I'll hand over to Mary when you're ready.
So has everybody had the chance to access the Padlets?
No, I'm sorry, but I will follow you.
It's okay.
Maybe we should say as well, if you do want us to pause, or you have a question, or you want to shout out anything that's on your mind, please do. You know, we'll welcome interaction.
Mm-hmm. Interaction via your microphone or via the chat, whichever is more comfortable for you.
There's also the little button at the top with the little hand. You can raise your hand if you want.
Yes.
Ask any questions as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so shall we begin, Mary?
Shall we begin? Yeah.
Just a thing I forgot to mention, for those who are not very confident with their listening comprehension skill, you know that on Teams you can activate the subtitles. So feel free to do it. Okay, yes. You got the 3 little dots, and you can, if you click on it, you'll probably be able to activate the subtitles. I know it's a beta version, but it works quite okay. That's it.
Activer les sous-titres dans les 3 petits points.
Excuse me, Hélène Palmieri from University of Montpellier. Just have a very simple question. I can see that la conversation est uniquement accessible aux membres de l'équipe. Is that the chat you were talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately, we try to find ways to make it available to everyone, but it seems complicated.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let's start then, and I have to begin by saying an enormous thank you to the team that have invited us. Olivier, Isabelle, Albertine, Amélie. It's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know new friends in France and to work on something together that we're all so interested in. And it's a great privilege for us to be invited to lead this second webinar in your series of webinars on EMI, or you may have noticed on the slide we've put EME, and that's something that we can talk about later if it interests you. Rob and I have years of experience and we're very fortunate for this because of our context, because of the university that we work in. And some years ago, we wanted to provide something to support people in different parts of the world. We we realised that EMI, EME was a growing global phenomenon, and we wanted to provide something to support people all over the world who might, for various reasons, for various motivations, need some help. We don't know your motivations in coming here today. We don't know the motivations of people who join us on our MOOC, but our motivation is to help and support people who have the same interests as us. We are gradually building a network of like-minded people all over the world through our MOOC. And this screenshot is a Z-map that showed on the 7th of June, so just over a week ago, the locations of some of the people on our present MOOC. We'll give you more details of this later on, but every time we run the MOOC, we have a picture very much like this, with the little pins scattered all over the globe, and sometimes you get concentrations in various countries, which indicates perhaps something going on in that country to do with EMI. And if you look carefully, you can see that at the moment there's quite a lot of activity in Brazil, and that reflects the conferences, the networks, the activity around EMI that is happening in Brazil at the moment. And on our present run of the MOOC, we actually have a small number of Brazilian colleagues joining us as facilitators. So I'm going to hand over to Rob now, who's going to give you a little bit more information about our background, about where we're coming from. We'll then move into one or two aspects of our work which we think will be of interest to you, and we think will go some way to answering some of the questions that you've asked. And then there'll be more time for more questions later on. Okay, so over to you, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So yes, just give a very brief background to who we are and where we're coming from. So we're from the University of Southampton, which frames itself as an international university. So we've got 23% of our academics and students are non-native speakers or non-mother tongue speakers. And obviously that's quite concentrated in some areas, but it's very interesting for us because we see things locally in the UK that are quite international practices. You know, we have colleagues who speak English as a second language, and often this is treated slightly differently because English is the default language. So people would assume that a UK institution would be operating in English. And it's interesting to us to see how, when, for example, in France, if you start approaching the conversation about teaching through English, the conversation changes a little bit, even though the speakers and the practices are very similar to what we are familiar with in Southampton. So that's something that we're going to talk about later, but that's the characteristic of our context. We focused on EMI, or English Medium Education, through both research. So we're both involved with the Centre for Global Englishes, which is a research centre at the University of Southampton that's done lots of international research on how English is used, how English is encountered around the world, you know, in English medium education, but also in various aspects of life, but also through internationalization. So there are lots of initiatives that get funded in UK and US universities for, you know, the opportunities to follow an international agenda. So something like this, where we're engaging with people around the world, focusing on EMI. But one thing we wanted to make clear is that we often see it as a problem, you know, that some institutions by default look to the UK or the US for expertise on English medium education, because very often the best solutions and the best ways of going forward are local and are embedded, you know, within the universities in that setting. And there can be some ideological problems with the UK being the centre of advice and the centre of support for EMI. And lots of organisations in the UK, you know, make some money kind of promoting English, and that's not really our agenda. So we've tried to take a critical and realistic view of what happens when people try to teach through English, why people are turning to English at the moment, and then creating realistic local solutions for people in their settings. So as Mary said, we noticed the need for this space for EMI practitioners to network and engage in ideas. So we started doing some short courses for academics from different institutions, but realized although the contexts were different, they could probably benefit from talking to each other. So rather than having a course where the experts come in from outside, teach some people for a week and then leave again, actually creating a network where there are educators who are in a very similar position and who could support and talk to each other, that would be far more beneficial to them and the challenges that they faced teaching through English. And that's where the idea of the MOOC came. So we were involved with Future Learn, which is a MOOC platform, and we put forward this idea and were encouraged to create the English as a Medium of Instruction for Academics MOOC, which has thousands of people joining every time. I think, is it on the 12th run, Mary?
I'm not very good at counting.
No.
It's a good thing they asked me to teach English and not mathematics, because I'm not very good at counting. I think it's the 12th. Last time I said it was the 13th and it wasn't. I think this is the 12th. So the next one in October will be the 13th, I believe.
Right. Yeah. So as we said, we've brought together people from around the world in really, really interesting conversations and around themes where, yeah, the idea is that people can find people in a similar situation to themselves and provide advice, guidance, or just support where they need it. And one thing we thought that would interest you to begin with is some reflections on what we've noticed in terms of pedagogy. So we tend to find when we deal with EMI practitioners around the world that the most direct solutions are often found in pedagogy. So it's in how you teach, how you approach learning within the environment is the fastest and probably longest lasting development that you can make. And very often teachers, if they're asked to teach through English, their first concern and their first anxiety is about their language competence, very often their speaking skills, because they're thinking about facing an audience of students and having to talk at them for a prolonged period of time. And that, you know, that's made me anxious before when I've been asked to do a talk in Mandarin, and yeah, it scared me to death. But one of the key things we've noticed is that people taking on board pedagogy that's well suited to a multilingual, intercultural kind of context where not everybody speaks the language of instruction as a first language. We've noticed patterns in how we can approach that. So I'll hand over to Mary now to talk about that.
Thanks, Rob. We're focusing on the lecture today, and obviously there are other aspects of the EMI's teachers' workload that we can talk about. But just today we'll focus on the lecture. And I think that if we say the word lecture, to many people this evokes a picture of a lone academic standing at the front of a lecture theatre with possibly 100 or more students listening as the person speaks and taking notes. And it's largely a one-way form of communication, and there may be time for questions, but there's not an awful lot of interaction going on. Now, of course, this is exposing a new, perhaps anxious EMI practitioner to a really scary situation. First of all, the length of time that the person is expected to talk for, a very large audience and very little scope for interactivity. So the picture we have here is, I think, what many people sort of conjure up in their minds if they think about a traditional lecture. And I put the word traditional in brackets because I wasn't really quite sure what to call it, but I think it is a traditional lecture and has been so for a long time. This is what I experienced at university many, many years ago, and it hasn't really changed. So perhaps there is time for a change, and perhaps new ideas in pedagogy in general could be affecting the formats and the interaction in the lecture, because perhaps some change is necessary. So if we look at the next slide, this is something, it's a slide in which I'm trying to give a flavour of what appears to be emerging at the moment. And I have to say that this is not my idea, nor is it Rob's idea. This is a kind of synthesis, it's a pulling together of various ideas that have been suggested by different people on our MOOC and on our short courses. And this is something that I think is fluctuating, if you like. It's something that people are experimenting with at the moment and seeing what works for them. So if you remember the Z-map with all of those pins, so we have this global phenomenon, but narrowing down to the institution, to the discipline, to the person who is delivering knowledge, course content in a particular university. What, from this kind of overview, what will work for that individual? So rather than thinking of the lecture as this one solid block of time, it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours of speaking, delivering knowledge to a group of students. In order to help with language problems, with issues of getting people from different backgrounds to mix and work together, many academics are thinking, well, what can I do to prepare myself for my session that I'm going to deliver, and what can the students do to prepare themselves for the content of the lecture? So of course the obvious and possibly the easiest thing to do is to offer texts that can be read by the students, and thus issues around vocabulary might be addressed. Could be videos. Obviously there are so many different media surrounding us that, you know, we could make a long list of various activities, but this will give you a flavour. There could be questions for students to get together in small groups and discuss, tasks to do, but they're all preparing for the lecture, the middle column. And it's been possible, even during the pandemic, for these interactions to happen online as well as face-to-face. People have found ways of doing this. So during the lecture, perhaps we could take some of the pressure off the shoulders of the academic who is delivering in a language that is not his or her first language, by inviting input from students, by giving those students feedback, and then building on what the students have contributed already to the lecture. This therefore gives us different interactions during a session and the opportunity for what we call chunking, really dividing up into sections and moving clearly from one section to another section to another activity, and so on. Now, the last word in that middle column is pauses, and this reminds me to say to you that a couple of years ago I was doing some teacher training with teachers from universities in Serbia, and they asked me at the end of the workshop what was the most important thing that I had to say, the most important feature of delivering in an EMI context. And for me, my most important tip is don't be afraid of silence. Don't be afraid to pause and to think, because in the EMI lecture, students are happy to have a few moments to check with one another. Did I understand that right? What was that word that she used? Just looking at their notes and seeing if there are any gaps. There are so many things that students can be doing profitably if they're given a moment or two of quiet. And this, of course, is a moment or two of quiet for you. You can look at your plans and what you're going to be treating next in your session. Gather yourself together and be ready for the next chunk. And then, of course, after the session, there are your follow-up activities, your discussions, preparation for the next week. So this is a quick overview of what I said seems to be emerging as a kind of EMI pedagogy, and it's a basis that some teachers are interpreting in their own context, for their own disciplines, for their own style of teaching, in a way that actually helps them as individuals and helps students. Is there anything you'd like to add, Rob? There's so much to say about this slide.
Yeah, I would just clarify that that what we're showing here is what tends to come after reflection, after engagement, after people consider what is best practice and can implement it. But obviously the starting point of most people is that they're put into a situation where the focus is on the middle column. So yeah, so what we're showing here is what tends to come out of their engagement with best practice, rather than other people's starting point, because the starting point tends to be very different. Yeah. But thank you, Mary. No, nothing to add particularly.
Nothing to add. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay. This is where I will add. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is just looking at the previous table and just some considerations that are important, because essentially each of these activities have certain considerations to them in terms of how you do them, how you manage them, and why you do it that way. So much like learning a language, language learners who aren't very effective will think, I want to learn the whole language as quickly as I can. Effective language learners will focus on particular micro elements of learning the language and develop those skills. I think in EME settings, we have to think about in each of those stages, there are things that you can do as a teacher that helps intelligibility, helps clarity of message and motivation and things like that. So just some considerations that we've noticed coming out of that. First of all, form of communication. So for example, lots of people focus on language, and one of the first questions that the participant gave in relation to this webinar was, you know, what's the level of language needed? But it's important to remember that research is constantly showing that there are, for example, if you use an image, it can take away a lot of the pressure on language. They say, you know, an image is worth 1,000 words, but, you know, showing something on a PowerPoint that's visual can remove a lot of the pressure on language for students. There's also research on, for example, watching videos where students are in high pressure situations and they need to understand the content. An online video that they can watch in their own time, some students really watch it carefully and they use software to help them understand it. And actually it sounds very simple and very traditional, you know, it's like the lecture delivers content, but actually an asynchronous lecture is something that students can engage with in their own time. And if they're lower level learners, then they will just have to spend more time doing it. But that's something, for example, that's been seen as very effective during this COVID period, is that students who previously went to lectures and didn't understand much are able to watch relatively short videos normally, but they're able to watch them very carefully, very conscientiously, and develop their understanding from that. So just the first consideration is form. So how you present it, and not just to think about the language as a kind of transmission from you to them. The other thing is direction. So every one of those activities could be communication from the teacher to the student, or could be student-centered, where the students are engaged in activities talking to each other. And how you set that up and how you support that in an English medium environment is an important consideration in terms of how you present it and how you get them to engage with that. And often another emphasis we have is, you know, creating that culture of engagement, activities that have clear expectations on the students, that are interactive and where they understand the value of what they're doing. And the other thing I mentioned there is just timing, that there are some types of communication which are much more effective if they are asynchronous. If it involves particular vocabulary that students would have to look up, that's much better to have before you get them to go into a lecture or a seminar. Introducing that in real time is going to cause difficulty. And then there are some things that are much more advantageous to be synchronous, you know, in terms of motivation, in terms of the feeling of interacting and learning together. You know, there's an advantage to synchronous communication because it's more interesting, it's exciting, it's happening, and you're part of it. So these are the kinds of considerations that we think are important to emphasize. And maybe later, you know, when we discuss, and if you have questions or comments or want to share good practice that you've had, then maybe these are some of the frameworks that you could look at. And yeah, so Mary, you wanted to talk about translation as well.
Yes, yes. The first thought we all have when having to speak in another language, and certainly something as important as a lecture that is going to be part of a course on which students will be assessed and examined, and this obviously counts towards an individual's future career and so on. It's a serious undertaking, and we want to get it right, and we want to get the words right. And so our first thought is, do I have the words? Do I have the grammar and so on? And I noticed last week that there was a fair amount of comment about translation, and possibly one of our aims is to take a little bit of the emphasis away from translation and onto other aspects of the kind of total EMI experience, such as that framework that I showed you a few slides ago, you know, the pre, the during and the post, which actually can help to take the pressure off you and take the pressure off your students. So quite clearly we need good resources, we need good tools to help us to find, you know, precise meanings and precise usages of words in our subject area. We need to know differences between formal and informal. Obviously, if we're speaking to a group of students at the end of our lecture, then our language could be far more informal, talking when everything's finished and we're talking about perhaps slightly different things. And perhaps we want a more formal delivery when we are in the lecture theatre itself. It depends on personalities and your particular style of teaching. But we do need good resources, and we need time with those good resources so that we can be sure of our precise terminology and know the difference between something that's used in a particular way in our subject area and then how it might be used in a more informal situation. So we need to explore apps and all of the different resources. We almost have too many resources now. So time spent giving students your advice as to the best sources of support for language in your area is time well spent. And the time that we spend, therefore, in the lecture theatre can be used to its maximum advantage when we are actually in the delivery phase, if you like, of knowledge and content. And if we are to totally translate everything for our students, is that actually, in the long run, that beneficial? It seems an obvious thing to say that we are living in a multilingual world when people from different linguistic backgrounds are coming together in, say, your lecture theatre to work together to hear you pass on your valuable knowledge in the business world and in engineering and so on. But could it actually be detrimental if we do everything for them? If we give the students advice on sources of support for them and then let them use them together in multilingual groups, perhaps that is giving them an experience that will be very valuable to them when they leave the university and pursue their careers. So even that experience of working out together precise meanings of words, it cannot be overlooked. These are skills for life, skills that students need for the progression of their careers. I think I'd like to move on to the next slide now, Rob, which is your questions. So we have looked at the comments that you've made in that very, very valuable enrolment form that you filled in. You asked some questions, you answered some questions that were set for you, and perhaps we could have a look at some of those questions now, and we'd be grateful if people could put some questions in the chat or interrupt us, as we said earlier, as we are going through them. So the questions, quelle différence dans l'approche pédagogique? Okay, well, I think that slide with the 3 columns indicates something that is happening for EMI practitioners, but it's also happening in other ways for people who are perhaps not working in the EMI field. I have sensed not a rejection of the traditional lecture, I wouldn't say that, and the traditional lecture has a place. When somebody is invited to speak on a given topic, an expert, and knows how to deliver that content to a large audience, there is a practiced way of delivering, and it is different from the kind of way you might deliver content, you know, the hurried teacher trying to get through the syllabus before the end of the academic year, that kind of thing. So I have noticed teachers who are not in the EMI setting actually changing the way that they teach in the lecture situation. The second question, comment pouvons-nous être accompagnés? I wasn't quite sure what this referred to, but I suspected that this was a reference to the fact that in some places, and I think there are places where perhaps there is some freedom to move around and to help one another, that perhaps somebody from the English department might be able to work with the lecturer who is delivering content, the two work together in order to facilitate the delivery of a session. So it demands, well, we don't like to talk about finances, but certainly if a teacher from one department is working in tandem with somebody from another department, you know, that is a kind of doubling up of resources. It can be a very, very profitable way of moving forward with EMI, helping new academics new to EMI to move forward, perhaps if they're lacking a little bit of confidence. But there are certain reservations that one could make about this, but I do know that it is happening in some places. And the third question, do I have to simplify my course because I'm using English? No. I think that is the answer. No, not at all. One hopefully would deliver the same content, the same amount of content, but use time differently and use resources differently. Would you like to add anything, Rob?
I was just going to add with that last point. I think quite often when programs or modules switch to English, it's often with a pragmatic purpose in mind. So, for example, if it's business, it becomes business for a particular purpose, which I think that the my course part of that question, so do I have to simplify my course because I'm using English? Quite often when courses switch to English, they change their learning objectives, and English become, or something to do with global citizenship or international sort of roles or purposes become part of the learning objectives. So just to be aware that quite often if you read the university's policy documents, the course shouldn't remain exactly the same. So that, again, that's what I've seen in other countries anyway, where the lecturers are often the last people to know or to realize that what they should be delivering through English is part of a slightly different agenda and entails slightly different learning objectives, which might be simpler in some academic terms, but entail much, you know, it's complex, you know, they might entail quite difficult learning goals in the area of other types of communication and knowledge, so like intercultural awareness, for example.
I think around that last question, there is a feeling of fear. We've come into this profession because we want our students to learn, to be educated, because we have a passion for a particular subject, and we don't want that content to suffer in any way because of perhaps a lack of confidence on our part. And I think this question actually shows dedication on the part of the person who posed the question, because you want the students in your group to have the maximum. You want to give them everything you possibly can, and you don't want anything that perhaps you feel, you know, a little less confident about to lessen the impact on your students and lessen the quality of what you're trying to give them. So I do feel that that question has come from a dedicated teacher.
I just wanted to qualify a little bit what Rob mentioned about the teachers not being aware of their courses objectives being changed. Okay, very often what happens, at least in my university, is that the master course, okay, just switches to English, okay, for international reasons that we talked about in the previous webinar. But the objectives haven't changed at all.
Right, right.
So that's the main difference, probably. That is, when you've got a whole training that becomes international, if that's the way we call it, then the objectives won't change.
That's that's very interesting. Because another thing that, in my experience, tends to happen is that people tag the label international in front of previous modules. So you've got, for example, or a program like, let's say, business and marketing, then that will change the name to international business and marketing and becomes English, like delivered through English, because English is seen as the international language. And then that's where there are often subtle changes that happen. But it's very interesting that this is just a language change, but without the structural change. So thank you for clarifying that. That's a difficult position.
Perhaps we should move on to the next slide.
Okay, yeah.
Questions about language, yes.
Yeah, so these were some questions we grouped together based on, or with language as the common thread. So first of all, what level in English should be required to teach in English? This is a very common question, and there's a simple answer and a more complicated answer. And lots of the people, we've seen the answers that the participants have given, and some of those are very good answers, and I'm just paraphrasing you. But yeah, I think the idea that aiming for C1 in the common European framework is quite useful. You know, the idea that people should have a certain level of proficiency, but also what we tend to find in reality is that people who are that level are not necessarily very effective communicators. And there are other people who are able to operate in English because they're effective communicators and have very advanced knowledge of their field and can use a range of tools, who are able to bridge that gap. And so on one level, there is a simple answer, as high as possible. And on another level, there is a certain amount of discrimination that can come. Again, I'll go back to my experiences in East Asia, where now lots of universities are employing younger people with high English proficiency levels with the assumption that they'll be able to teach more effectively through English, because English medium education is the big agenda now in lots of countries. So it's creating this inequality between people with a slightly lower proficiency in English who are being excluded from EMI, and younger academics who are coming in and getting more promotional opportunities and job opportunities. but the assumption that those people are better and are received better by students is really not true. And so this is there are a lot of ideologies in that question, which we need to be very careful about, because you don't want to force somebody who's not very good at speaking English to teach through English, but you don't want to assume that somebody, just because they have a higher IELTS score, will be more effective as an educator in an English medium setting. So yeah, that's an important point around that.
Yeah. If I could just come in here, Rob,
Please
for a
do, yeah.
moment. We've had, as we said, several groups of academics from various countries, and I'm not going to say where these academics were from, but they were from a country, and they were not the younger academics that Rob's just talked about. They were older, and they had started their university careers with the assumption that they would continue to teach through their mother tongue for the rest of their lives. Now, for various reasons, and we won't go into those, it happened that they were encouraged to change this around and teach through English. And I had to reassure them that they had discipline knowledge, the knowledge of their subject, which they had been teaching successfully for very, very many years. They were also researchers, and they were absolutely on top of their subject. They knew how to command an audience, to be there in front of 100 or more students, and for everybody to pay attention to what they were saying. And they had other skills. The only problem was that they hadn't spoken English for very, very many years, so that they were lacking in confidence. So it was a question of showing to them how much they had already, and we could then help them with, for example, some of the techniques that Rob has mentioned, with images and other, I don't want to say tricks, but that's what I'm thinking of, really. We found ways of helping them feel more confident about themselves and about their delivery, so that instead of the frightened, scared individuals they were at the beginning, they were actually able to leave us smiling and confident. Their English actually wasn't all that much better, but it was what they were doing with their English and how they felt about their English that really counted in the long run. And so this is really important, I feel, for some of you here in the audience. I don't know who you all are, but you could be in a similar-ish kind of situation. I don't know what pressures there might be on you. I don't know, but I can imagine. Sorry, Rob.
No, that's great. No, yeah, and the other part of that is something we touched on earlier, which is the importance of local knowledge and local solutions, because English medium education is not about teaching students English. And very often, and actually in my research, when I was in China and Taiwan in particular, there was a perception among students that was very negative towards foreign lecturers who were coming in as outsiders, because they knew they'd been employed because of their English ability, and they lacked the contextual knowledge and the background to be able to inform these students on the same level. So that there was a genuinely negative push, that these weren't part of a genuine internationalization. These were people who were coming in as a push for English language, which, when people have signed up to do a degree, quite often they can have quite a negative perception to having the English language pushed rather than the content knowledge through English. And that might seem like a small distinction, but I think it's a very important one when we look at student motivation, because lots of students can be motivated to learn through English, and they will learn happily with somebody else from a similar background who knows the issues involved in doing that. Whereas having someone coming in with really high levels of English with which students are not particularly familiar can have a negative impact, because that's not seen as communication, that's seen as teaching English. So yeah, that's another important area. And as I mentioned, by the way, please do come in if you have any comments or wish to elaborate or ask any questions. Then yeah, we are hoping to open this up to a discussion.
Yeah, that's a question from Helen. Yeah, Helen, can you raise your hand? So
yeah, thank you very much. So I like all these very positive ideas. That's really it's really nice. From my experience, I remember first I spent a few years in the United States, and I remember that you had some people coming in very good level. I remember, for example, a roommate of mine. She just arrived from India, and she was teaching at the university, and unfortunately the students could not understand what she was saying. Very bad. And here, and on the other hand, when I arrived, I remember they said right away they tested my level, and they decided, okay, you're not going to need more classes, but if not, there would have been classes. Here in France, we've been trying to start programs in English, notably a certificate last year in administration business. And we had the students, because very often, as you know, probably, those students are pretty good, bilingual, or they went to, programme européen, international, etc., etc. La crème de la crème, you know what I mean? Okay, and so my colleagues came to see me and they said, well, they are better than we are. And sometimes they correct us, etc. And then the students came to complain to me and they said, well, we thought we were entering, a really bilingual program, and some of those professors, they can't handle English, blah, blah, blah. And the question is the following. Don't you think there should be training for the as you said, C1 is probably, but very often it's not the case, that. So how long do you think that people should train to be able to get to this level C1 and be comfortable, so they don't get into those criticisms? Did you have that in England, for example, at the university?
That's, yeah. I mean, something we were going to mention is actually how rare that is, that students, I think it's, like I said, the expectation that it's an international setting and that English will be the medium. I think it reduces the students' that kind of negative reaction to somebody communicating through English who's not from the UK. And I think so we were talking before this session actually, and saying that it's very interesting how lots of these concerns and genuine reactions from students tend to be more common. It's almost like counterintuitive. They're more common in a setting where English is being introduced for the first time, and you'd expect these kind of difficulties, than in the UK, where you would imagine people have a negative reaction to international colleagues. But actually it's very, very rare that students will react negatively to an international speaker. And I think it partly that relates to their classmates also being from other countries. So I think that international environment possibly stops students from thinking, I want it delivered perfectly. But to answer the question for me, I'll let Mary answer as well. But for me, I think the question is very much an ongoing, I think there has to be an institutional and national kind of network and program of ongoing support and teacher development. Yeah. There is no quick fix to getting someone up to C1 and keeping them there. I think this is absolute. If people are going to take English medium education seriously, or education through any language, they have to support and create opportunities for continuing development. And this is not like a, once a semester workshop. It has to be quite systematic, networked, and ongoing, because even at C1, people can lack the communicative ability to convince students that they're actually good at the language. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing that, sorry, just to mention very quickly, I don't want to talk endlessly, but the other thing that you mentioned is also, I'm a big advocate of part of EMI education being educating the students to be more globally minded and more tolerant of English. So they're not studying English as Americans speak it or as British people speak it. They're preparing for a global world where English is used in multilingual settings, and them rejecting the language of their lecturer might be symptomatic of having the wrong mindset and actually lacking the skills to be able to engage with English. So I think that's the other side, is to encourage students to be tolerant of variation in language. And, yeah.
I think that's very true, and that's why we now offer. I'm sure it's the same at the University of Southampton. We now offer cross-cultural awareness classes, and because you were talking about international, what does it mean? You think because the course is in English, that's international? No, not at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So now we're talking about communication and cross-cultural awareness, and you're right, it goes together. I mean, it should, according to me. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you for.
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
I'd just like to add that if in the context that you've just described, there is some difficulty in understanding the way another person speaks in English. This has to be seen as a positive. I really believe in turning negatives into positives. It has to be seen as a positive, that here's an opportunity to understand the speech that could be typical of a person from such and such a country. Now, after the university course is finished, I was talking earlier about life skills. Some of our students will go into business and so on. They will be doing international business. They'll be having, conversations with people all over the world. So part of it is self-realization of how do I speak when I speak in English? What might I be doing in the way I speak that could be a bit difficult for other people to understand? And then being open to understanding the speech of others. So, in fact, it is another life skill, and it could be that in the future, a student might be really grateful to have had a lecturer or somebody in the class with whom they had difficulties understanding. That could be a tremendous gift. So. I do remember observing a class many years ago where I couldn't exactly understand the speech of the teachers, and yet the students could understand what the teacher was saying very readily and were very happy. And it was with time and getting the ear tuned in that they were able to communicate very, very successfully and had got used to one another. So sometimes we want it now, don't we? We want to be able to understand immediately, when in fact a little bit of time and patience could be quite useful. Back to you, Rob.
I've got a question from Richard Palmer. Can you your turn?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Can you hear me? Yes, I was just reiterating the point that Mary and Robert would have made earlier on. about having, taking the time out. Yes, can you hear me?
Just, yes.
Right, I was saying I was reiterating the point about taking the time to get the students acquainted to the accent and to the language of the lecturer, because I'm a Jamaican teaching English in France, and initially it was difficult to get the students to understand my accent and to understand what it is I was saying, but over time they understand, and so I do believe that it takes time, and it has also been part of my personal philosophy where I try to get the students to understand that English is not just American or British. It really is a way of communicating, and it is a tool that they need to develop and not just be so focused on, oh, you don't have a British accent, oh, you don't sound American. Can you use English to communicate as a tool? And so over time, I've got my students used to not just my accent, but I engage them with persons from different countries in the Caribbean where I'm from, St. Lucia, Trinidad, and they hear different accents and they're surprised because oftentimes they don't really get the chance to, hear these type of accents. And so I think it is our duty, the onus is on us as lecturers as well, to emphasize the need for students to not think that because I don't speak fluently, I'm not a native speaker, I'm not from Britain, I'm not from the US, then I can't teach in English.
Yeah, that's part of I completely agree. And we in our institution, the research center I mentioned have been involved in a lot of projects and communication with lecturers here, and convincing people here that because they speak the higher, should we say, educated southern dialect of Britain does not mean that you are understandable to an international audience. And exactly. So I think that kind of ideology is very strong. And there is a lot of ideology and privilege in this system. And if we're going to talk about genuine internationalization, it cannot emphasize like a UK is best or America is best mentality. And it's really important that that you're doing what you're doing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
So we'll move through, and please do come in with questions and comments as you go through. That's really valuable.
We have a question from Frank McKenna in the chat.
Oh yes.
MC Kenna.
Yes, thank you. Listen, as I said at the very beginning, I'm new to Teams, so I was looking, how do I raise my hand? So I ended up typing the question, but here I am. It's in relation to the fourth question on the slide and the previous remarks about, do teachers have to have a sufficiently high level of English to write and mark exams? And I was just wondering how you felt, for example, in the Flemish, some Flemish institutions, where they have compulsory certification of the lecturers before they get their contracts, just before they can actually start teaching. They have to pass a C1 certification, and it's compulsory. I mean, there's no sidestepping it. And I was just wondering, I think the Dutch have basically answered this question and said, yes, we would like our teachers all to have C1 level. I was just wondering what you thought about this.
Yeah,
is it something that we could, that could be implemented elsewhere?
It's absolutely, that's possible, and they systematically, brought English into higher education with quite a bold ambition. So they set their targets, and I would add, though, they had the luxury to do that because the levels of proficiency are quite high among most members of staff. And you tend to find, I think most places would do that if they could. Compromise happens where compromise has to happen. I think, we're dealing in conversations with a few institutions in South America and in Southeast Asia as well, where they don't have that luxury. And that's where these longer targets have to happen. And if they were to bring in something like that, it would be possibly a 10-year target. Or, as I said, you'd get this two-tier system happening in the university where they employ people because they're able to do that, and the people who were working in these universities originally but don't have C1 level will become less and less valuable. And the more EMI happens, the more these people will be filtered out of higher education. So it's a difficult one, and there's a simple answer to it, which is it seems to make sense to set your level, but again, it does come with difficulties, though, as I said. Yeah.
Okay.
But thank you for raising that. That's a good point. Anything?
Thank you for answering.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so should I, if there are no other questions, just to mention briefly, there were some good answers to some of these from the responses that we got. So, will students improve their language level in an EMI class? I think is the most important question for policymakers, particularly when they fund support for English medium education, because the answer is certainly not necessarily. It's this intuitive idea that because people study through English, they will improve their English language ability, but multiple studies have found this is not necessarily true, and also that this is a mixed profile. So people who are reading a lot in English will probably develop vocabulary, but also what we find in the UK even is that students might improve some aspects of their language ability, but they will go through a natural process of acquisition. So they're using English, they're exposed to English, but what they produce might become grammatically less accurate, for example, because they're bridging towards a more advanced competence. So like language learning is not linear. So you don't just get better and better and better. When you go from simple grammar to complex grammar, you go through a period of producing, I'll be careful, in intercultural communication, there's no such thing as inaccurate, but you produce non-standard language in your communication, which can seem to be less proficient if you're just judging, on proficiency scales, like is the grammar accurate? So I think that's a very complex question, and certainly the answer is we shouldn't assume that students who are studying through English will improve their general English ability. Certainly not. But that it can be enhanced through support and through targeting particular skills that would come under English competence. And yeah, we'll be happy to discuss that further as you like. And then, can specialist teachers with less than perfect English harm their students? I think that's another one of those ideological questions where I think that's something to get across, or something to communicate to students, that this is a fear that's often very, very misplaced, and it can be quite dangerous and harmful to the teacher-student relationship if students feel that their teacher's English is harmful to their language development. Again, we're talking global communication. We're talking the skills to engage with communication through English and possibly through multiple languages, and that shouldn't be seen as harmful in any of these settings. So, shall we move to our final topic, Mary?
Yes, let's.
Okay, and then yeah. I hope these are generating some further questions from you. But the other theme we noticed was intercultural issues. So what is the interest of mixed international classes? And again, most people's responses noticed this perfectly well, that the motivation behind this and the key advantage of having international classes is that kind of the ability to communicate, the ability to understand, the enhance students' empathy, students' awareness. I think awareness of students themselves, knowing about their own culture can come from dealing with other cultures. So there are a range of answers to this question and lots of advantages from international classes. But at the same time, there are also lots of anxieties. And one thing we do get in Southampton is occasional negative reactions from students, not so much to the international teachers, but they can come to the international students, particularly if there's one group who are quite dominant, often Chinese students. So we can get this negative reaction to internationalization from students who don't recognize the value of communication with people from other backgrounds. Sometimes students would prefer to communicate in their first language with people who are like them. But again, I think it's important to emphasize that this is not what modern higher education is about, certainly on some modules.
I've got a question from Brett Johnson. Yeah.
It's not hi. It's not so much a question as a comment, actually. I just wanted to say that when you have a class that's much more diverse, students, particularly in France, see very quickly the interest in asking questions and becoming much more interactive. There's a tendency for French people not to ask questions, and I think that's a real richness. The other thing is, to tell you the truth, that international students are already selected by those who are very motivated. So they tend to be highly motivated students in a class, and so they draw up the level of the class.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Two fantastic points, yeah. And you think about the bravery of traveling around the world to engage in higher education through another language. I would expect motivated students. And yeah, I agree with what you've said.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, just to say that that can cause exchanges afterwards of exchanging English competencies for competencies in French, for instance, and really promoting a much more international view in the classroom.
Yeah. And one thing, certainly from my experience in, I think, Chile and Taiwan, the two places that I've worked with quite closely, I found that to be exactly the case. The best examples of international English medium education being implemented was when the international students were interested in learning the language that was spoken locally as well as operating through English.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think France would find this, that there are lots of international students who wouldn't know French to a high enough level to be able to study through French, but they could get the opportunity to study in France because they know English. But actually their motivation for coming to France would be to learn French, to exchange cultural knowledge with French students. And I think that's a really important and valuable part of the atmosphere, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Mary, were you going to add something?
No, not at all. I was just saying because I agree. And it's a wonderful thing to see in the classroom. People from such different backgrounds questioning one another, finding out about, the way of thinking and so on. This is such a valuable opportunity. And, going back to the subject of people with accents and so on, those people have already mastered their own first language and possibly others. And they are brave enough to venture forth and leave behind families and goodness knows who else, in order to have the experience of learning and studying in another country. These people to be admired more than anything else.
Brett would like to add another comment.
Right, Brett, yes, come on.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, so choose other people instead of me.
You seem to have a lot of questions, so
I think it's really interesting to also ask the question, is English a vector to bring foreign students to dare to come to France who wouldn't otherwise? Because I think that one of the great fears in France actually is that French culture is going to become a third world culture if everybody teaches in English. Okay, there is really this it's a general sort of fear about McDonaldization of teaching by teaching in English. Basically we're going to become American universities teaching And so I think the French people really need to ask the questions also about how can they promote the specificities that are available in France as well? And could English eventually be a vector for that? But this also means that the French educational system has to put money into training students to learn French when they come to French universities. And I think that's been completely ignored.
Mm. I can speak only for my university. Most of the time the programs that are taught in English include French classes for foreign students.
Yeah, it's the same in Angers, at the University of Angers as well. We offer French classes as well. So
yes, yeah.
Same in Le Mans.
Rightly.
Yeah. French class. Sorry, French classes. The FLE. French.
Yes.
Okay, because French classes, obviously, everyone's offering French classes. But
okay, so
but it's a strong FLE program. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really needs to be highlighted as much as the competencies in English, in fact.
A question for you: is the fear of I don't know, the dominance of English as great as it is sometimes made out to be? To give you an example, last week, because of everything that's happened in the UK, we won't go into that, I read something in the newspaper whereby Macron had said that French would be the language of the EU, rather than, default English and so on. Is this something that's, dominant in French newspapers, in the media? Hello.
I can only talk about what I can see in the comments. That's true that there have been some answers to the webinar that were clearly indicating that there was this fear.
There is fear.
English, becoming the dominant language for teaching in higher education, right?
And I think, I think I take both sides of this discussion actually, because I think it's really important to emphasize that as an international language with many other international languages out there, English could be a vehicle for French higher education to promote itself, and for French scholars to promote their own status and international standing. But at the same time, there is something to be fearful of, and even in the UK, the medium of instruction didn't change, but there are certain discourses in higher education that come with internationalization, and they can be very, or they can lack the character of the local setting. They can become a little bit. You used McDonaldization, but it's that kind of idea of, sometimes institutions want to create a product that people can pick off the shelf that looks like the other products, and you lose, a sense of self almost. You're just delivering this international product, and, University of Southampton is the same as any other university of the same level. So I think both sides of these have to be engaged with critically, and adopting English, people have to be very mindful that it might not be the English that's harmful, it's what comes with it. It's the policy changes that come with it. It's the, if for example, French is not promoted and is not part of the international student experience, then that could be something that's damaging and harmful in the long run. So I think that those are good questions, and you have to balance your reaction to that. And so just finish our last question, and then we can open up to discussion without me sharing my screen. I think I can see people. So with a handful of foreign students in my class, do I have to translate my English to the French students? Again, it can depend. For me, it depends on the setting. you can, and also how you do that, because I've observed settings before where it's very much a local. I'm thinking of Thailand now, where there were international students in the room, but the content was Thai. The two languages of instruction were Thai and English, and most of the international students were playing a game called Farmville. I was sitting at the back of the lecture theatre, and I could see, they were not engaging because it was a bit exclusionary to the international students. But at the same time, I would emphasize the importance of multilingualism and saying, because it's in English, it should be English only, and you shouldn't value the languages that students bring to the classroom or use your language ability to help students learn. I think that's a very dangerous territory to go towards as well. So possibly where we talk about translation, we could be talking about outside of the classroom, because sometimes like translating the content for some of the room can be seen as exclusion. But yeah, I think we would not support the idea that English medium education means that other languages are erased. I think that's not helpful for internationalization. But at the same time, you want a group identity where everyone is included. And I think what Brett mentioned there, the promotion of French and English would make sense in a French setting. So yeah. Shall we go to
Let's
group?
look at the last slide, shall we?
Oh yes, sorry.
Yeah. Just to say that our current run of the MOOC started on June 7th. It is 4 weeks in length, but there are an extra 2 weeks during which participants can finish what they're doing. There are a number of reading texts suggested, so there might be something there that you would be interested in reading, and you can join. It's free. It's not going to cost you anything to enroll. Might be a little bit too late in your academic year to join us, but remember, we will be starting up again in October, same course, and the same facilitators, Rob and me, as usual. So if you do join us, please say hi, and say that you were with us today for this presentation. I think that's all I wanted to say, apart from thanking once again our organisers. Shall we see if there are any more questions?
Right. Okay. Well, now we'd like to we'd love to hear from you a little bit. So if you got questions, it's open. It's open.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Right.
Okay, I've got another question in the chat about translations. Which applications could we use for translating? Well, as we mentioned the other time, I'm using DeepL because it supports many languages. It's
DeepL.
It's really good. Okay.
Right.
And there are just some minor adjustments to be made.
Sorry. Does it provide the depth of information that we would require?
Yeah. Really.
And it's free?
Free.
Woo! Even better.
Free and really, really good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Maybe just for translation, that's all I can think of. I don't know if there are other English teachers in the room. You probably use them as well, so or help your students use them. So feel free to share your tips.
Yeah, I also use DeepL. I think it's the best thing the best free tool online at the moment. I don't know if it's gonna stay free forever, but anyway, for the moment it is. But you still have to make some adjustments. You can't just use the translation as it is. So you have to be careful still. But it's still better than Google Translate.
Yeah, always better.
Yeah.
There are also you can also use, but I think it's to pay for it. That's Grammarly. Grammarly is an app.
Someone mentioned it last time.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it's free.
Any other questions?
Can I? Yeah. Fatima Tali from Le Mans University. I just want to add something, a comment regarding do we have to translate into French, for instance, if we teach in English a class? I really agree that I would say we don't have to. But here, I think this question is asking about our pedagogy, our capacity of being able to explain a concept, a notion, even an advanced one, at different students in different ways. I would say if this was the case in my class, and I would use layman vocabulary first, try to explain with very simple words, even if the concept is very complex. But actually, we are specialized in a field which we know deeply. Then, how to translate this knowledge to our students into another language? It's just, I think it's a challenge which we have just to meet using very easy vocabulary, using images, as you say. And this is where our creativity is questioned, and our ability to teach and to teach at multi-level. And this is what I see, what might be challenging in teaching in a class where the students are not English native speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just add to that. Yeah, there are absolutely times where you show that expertise and where it will benefit students. But yeah, just to mention as well that, of course, with what Mary mentioned, with how you engage students, some of that translation work could be done by them. Because everyone, if they have access to the internet, they can probably find, okay, what does that word mean in your language? How would you explain it to each other? How would you apply it to this context? It depends on the field, but there are some things it's very easy for the teacher to say, this is what the word means, and just avoid the problems and show your expertise. But there are other concepts. In the field I work in, no word is simple. You can say, what does that mean? What does that mean? And get paid for asking that question. But yeah, so sometimes you throw the question to the students and maybe have them creating the dictionary of that day's topic, whatever it may be. So yeah.
I think that the piece of advice that I give my teachers as well is that they should also try to build a glossary for their course, providing the definitions for all the, well, say, complicated words or content words that are really complicated, and give access to this glossary to their students beforehand or before the lesson, for example, because it saves you the trouble from explaining that mid-course. I mean, it's always complicated finding a definition that is even in your field, okay, that will require a lot of efforts from you. So if you give them beforehand, it's much better. And by the way, I'm using Quizlet for that. I'm not promoting that, but Quizlet is great tool for English teachers, but I think also within that context.
And I even would say that building the glossary of the course, I even would say this is an excellent starting activity where we can ask students to bring their inputs, and then we upgrade it and share with everybody.
Absolutely. That's a very good starting point. Yeah, some teachers used this glossary as well as a starting point, as you said, and they asked the students to provide a mind map.
Yeah.
Using those words. That is putting those words within the categories, and then they've got this great mind map.
Yeah, and lectures are often very repetitive. So you get, sometimes if I remember watching a lecture with students I was helping at the time, and intelligibility was the key word that made them not understand the lecture at all. And if you can't grasp that one key word, sometimes you have no idea what the lecturer is talking about, even if you know the other words that they're saying. So I think absolutely, it's a really simple, and I've seen lots of studies on EMI where people talk about language competence, language complexity, but sometimes it can be one or two words that completely confuse the students and ruin the intelligibility of the class. So yeah.
Well, we've got a question from Frank.
So could I just add something there that I've seen some teachers do, excuse me, in a similar way to what you were suggesting, Fatimata, building a glossary of the course, that it doesn't end there, that glossary can be passed on to the next cohort of students. And one of the questions that's just disappeared from my chat anyway was talking about creativity. So the next year's cohort could be asked to do something quite creative with what they have inherited from the previous year's cohort. And this then rolls on and is quite an invigorating experience. So I just wanted to, make that point, that it's not just for that year. It can be an almost permanent, a flexible resource that's passed on from year to year.
Thank you for the tips.
So Frank
That was a lovely question from, was it Paul? I'm not sure. Sorry, Rob.
I was saying Frank has his hand up.
Yeah, it's just well, while we're on the subject of resources, it's going back to the DeepL and Lingui, for example. Now there are two quite distinct different types of technology. Lingui itself uses web crawlers. It finds translations of text on the web, good or bad. It doesn't matter if it's a translation and it's out there, usually in some European text of some kind. So it has been officially translated by a European organisation. It will find its way onto the internet. It finds its way into Lingui, and a lot of people are taking this as a valid translation. I've posted an example of the word nevertheless, which of course doesn't exist. It's the word nevertheless, but you'll find it on Lingui because it was badly translated. Yeah. On the other hand, the artificial intelligence that is DeepL is not a web crawler. It is a pure form of an artificial intelligence that does translate. It's been provided with the necessary algorithms, etc. So be careful with Lingui. Don't recommend it, as one of your prime resources. Well, I wouldn't, or at least if you do recommend it, then suggest that you have a further verification step. Okay, thank you.
I think that could be said for many apps, that
absolutely
anybody can create an app and say, well, this is the last word in whatever it is, and people believe it. So sticking to apps that are recommended by teachers and so on is something to emphasize with students. Otherwise they will fall into the trap of going along with Lingui. Did you say? It's
Lingui. You do it on Google. You'll pop up first. If you want to find out a definition of a word or a translation of a phrase or sentence, Lingui will be one of the first options that you're provided with to click on.
Okay.
I mean, it's good, but just be careful. That's all I'm trying to get across.
To really emphasise with students, that they should be careful where they go, and not everything is to be believed. Thank you so much for that, Frank.
No, I would add, just my experience recently has been the opposite of that, where I think 10 years ago, the task of getting students ready to produce assessments in English was so much more difficult because they genuinely had to do everything themselves. Now, I find students can create a 2,000, 3,000 word text quite easily using a lot of tools. And what we're talking about is, sometimes it's not the right meaning, or you can see it's a bit awkward, but I think engaging with students with these building blocks is quite useful, because actually they can use these tools to help them produce, to engage in English medium settings. And, sometimes the instinct is to treat it like a language course and ignore them. So you're not allowed to use translation because this is English. You're not allowed to use this because it's English. And actually, I think, at our university, we actively encourage students to use Grammarly and things like that, because the markers want to understand what they're marking. So yeah, it's an interesting point, because that's the recommendation for home students, so they can't make a different recommendation for international students. But no, it's just an interesting point that I think we'd be having a much more difficult conversation about the difficulties of EMI 10 years ago than we are now, despite the problem. So.
Are there any other questions? I think it's getting late, so maybe some people are starting to leave because they've got other things to do. Just
may I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Would you mind giving us the link about the university, precisely the center of research you mentioned earlier, Mary, please?
Yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have access to the chat, so I can't do that. But
right, okay.
The Centre for Global Englishes, do you mean?
Let me find it.
So you mean Mary has access and you don't?
That's right, yes. So that's okay, that's less responsibility for me. I can delegate.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think we've reached the end of the presentation, and if you don't have any further questions, first I'd like to thank you all for coming. That's great. Okay, we didn't expect so many people to answer, but that's great. So it has answered one of the questions. Okay, is it a global trend or a local trend? Probably, because we should address that question. I think it's spreading, and there might be a way to, or a need to, I don't know, to organize it, as you mentioned in our previous webinar, organize the movement, at least at the beginning, within our universities, and then across universities. That would be a good point.
Yeah. I think you need it, Olivier. I think there are enough people, given the turnouts today, I think there are enough people to follow your lead and to become part of this growing network.
We've got to find ways to do it, but we'll do.
Yes.
So for all those who participated, okay, we'll keep you in touch if we make any progress into organizing that. And if you don't mind, we'll include you in the list, okay, of our progress.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay, well, that's it for me. Thanks a lot, all of you.
Thank you.
I noticed
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah. Some people who raise their hand or just wanted to say goodbye or raise their hand.
Actually, I raised my hand because I was wondering whether you were going to share the recording.
Yeah, we will.
Yes.
Okay, great. So you'll send us the link.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the second question was, actually, I was never able to access the pad. Is that, could you post the URL so we could see it?
Yeah.
What?
Olivier?
Yeah,
Did you?
Sorry, I haven't.
The Padlet? Yeah.
The Padlet?
Yeah, we need to give the link to the Padlet, and also I think it was already in the chat, but some people can't
It's
see
the
that.
beginning of the chat, so
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I can't find the chat.
Oh, okay.
That's
Well,
the one thing. This is new platform for me, and I don't see where to find the chat.
Maybe we can email everyone with the link to the Padlet, and also
fantastic.
Well, all links that we shared today and the last time as well, and also some people would like to have answers to the questions that were asked in this chat last time, so we can create an FAQ or something.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah,
we'll do that.
FAQs. Yeah.
And yeah, this webinar as well as the previous one were recorded, so you can also watch it again or share it with your colleagues.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Olivier.
We keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Au revoir.
Brett. Bye, Brett.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for you.
Thank you.
I can